The oil price has sold off quite dramatically during the last 10 minutes or so. We're about 2.5% lower. Is this a classic case of buy on the rumour, sell on the fact?
Probably, yes, it is a classic case. And there's two things to look at. Yes, the oil markets, the OPEC, non-OPEC deal, which took 1.8 million barrels out of the market in terms of production cuts, managed to get the production overhang out of the system. Venezuela is all but falling off a cliff. Now with Iran, if there are further sanctions on Iran, which it looks there will be, the market is getting tighter. But what we also have to see is that not everybody will be as impressed with US sanctions as maybe the Europeans or other countries. China and some other countries may very well sort of say, okay, we will buy Iranian oil. So for the short run, I'm not worried that Iranian oil will be off the market. But in the medium to longer term, I am concerned because Iran desperately needs investment, and it also needs access to Western technology. You know, these many years of sanctions have left the oil sector reeling in being very uncompetitive and underinvested. So this is not a good thing for in the short run for oil markets. Maybe not such a big impact, but psychologically it will be. Markets are psychological, so they will react. But in the medium to longer term, this is not a good thing.
Well, Sanam, how sustainable is this deal without the United States? Is it a dead duck?
It will be very hard, especially if the U.S. goes for a hard exit, reimposing all nuclear-related sanctions and penalizes international companies for doing business in Iran. It will be very difficult. If they do the soft exit, though, there is an option where with Europeans and Russia and China can protect the deal.
So that's the thing. We don't exactly know what Trump is going to announce in terms of possible sanctions or not.
Reports suggest he's going to go for the hard exit, which would close the door and make protecting the deal very difficult for the Europeans and for Russia and China. It will also put immense pressure on President Rouhani, who has banked on this deal as his legacy and the opportunity to save the Iranian economy.
Well, Cornelia, you mentioned foreign firms doing business in Iran. I mean, Total, for example, the French oil major, one of the world's biggest oil and gas producers, they're trying to develop a gas field in Iran. What happens to that?
They're trying to develop the largest gas field in the world, the South Pars field. And the oil minister has come out, Mrs. Zanganeh has come out and said if they want to, they can't pull the investment, or you know, they can leave, but we will keep the investment. So that is tough. And sort of having worked for multinational companies, not just, you know, oil companies, also GE, and having worked in America, it's very tough once, you know, you are on a sanctions list. Once a country is on that restricted list, it's very, very tough for European or other companies to still do business in the US if they don't adhere to the sanctions. So it's going to be very, very tough.
So what options do such businesses have?
Chances are most businesses are going to turn their backs on Iran because they can't walk away from the American market. And the Iranian market is small and it's rife with challenges. Getting businesses going in Iran is tough. Then you have to contend with the Revolutionary Guard Corps also interfering. You have to deal with regulation that is outdated. So the ease of doing business in Iran does not outweigh the American penalties and opportunities.
Is this going to be a danger that this drives Iran into the arms of, say, Russia and China?
Possibly, very possibly. Already, Iran looks to those countries as protecting it in the past in the UN Security Council, and I think that relationship is only going to grow stronger as Iran sees those two countries as its lifeline, both economically and politically.
I mean, Cornelia, what was the thing that was most wrong with the deal? Was it the fact that it didn't hold Iran to restrictions in developing ballistic missiles? I mean, that's something that's got...
I think that was one of the things. The people who criticised it was the lack of the temporary restriction. It's the 10 years for one thing, 15 years for another thing. It was the fact that they could still develop ballistic missiles, and you know, some of the countries like Israel, who got very hot under the color over the deal. Things have changed in the last few years because since Russia has come into Syria with its very good air defense system, it's all but impossible for them to go and actually take things out. So things have changed. And when you look, to your point, when you look at Iran, China and Russia, when you look at how Iran is working with Russia in Syria, when you look at the whole Belt and Road concept of the Chinese and how they're working with Iran on that, yes, the West really has to think, do we want that sort of unholy alliance of China, Russia and Iran sitting in the Middle East?
So what's the best case scenario from here? Paint us a cheery picture.
I think that's a bit hard right now. We're on the brink of hearing some bad news. The best case scenario is that the Europeans pull some sort of Hail Mary pass and manage to convince Iran to come back to the table and improve upon the deal. Maybe a more for more scenario. But it's going to be very difficult to convince the Iranians that are already very factionalized among the political elite and are already very frustrated by the fact that the deal hasn't paid off to come back to the table because they see the U.S. as having moved the goalposts on this JCPOA. Iran has been compliant, and they're going to have to really struggle not to respond in kind and restart their nuclear program.
Yeah, so the risk, I guess, is that also you get a hard line taking Rouhani's place in Iran in due course.
Absolutely, not just at the presidency level, but we should also expect perhaps hardliners coming back and taking the parliament, and this could also have a negative effect when we think about succession to replace the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
I was really struck, Cornelia, you said just now that Iran can carry on selling their oil and gas. I mean, surely they'll be able to sell it with impunity to countries like India and China. They're not going to be too worried about busting US sanctions, are they?
I think they will not be too worried, and there are probably ways of doing this in a way. The Indians are getting closer to the Americans, so they will be a little bit more cautious, but the Chinese are not. And when you just look at the growing Chinese influence, globally and also militarily in the South China Sea and so on, that should surely worry the West. And I would like to paint one parallel, which is Qatar, which is now being isolated by the Gulf. When you were in Qatar 2 years ago, you heard English and Arabic. Now, when you go to Qatar, you hear Turkish, you hear Farsi, Iranian, and you hear Chinese. So things have changed.
All right, Cornelia, Meyer, Sanam, Vakil, thanks very much for joining me.